we are recording now. For those of you who didn't watch the recording, I sent home to you in the power outage with no Wi-Fi. I had to use my phone. I didn't have power out. My power was okay, but I didn't have any Wi-Fi, so I had to send it over my phone, and it took forever. Anyway, you will find when you read, are you turning in week 21 today?
I'm turning in a lot of stuff. I'm turning in week 19, week 20, and week 21.
And 21 was only class notes.
Yes, but there was a couple things that didn't get answered, like what was the bloodless revolution?
Okay, that was the glorious revolution. Yeah, okay. I didn't say the words bloodless revolution. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so here's the deal. At the beginning of the lecture I sent home, I explained in week 21 there's this huge assignment in there. Yeah?
Yes.
And it talks about your PowerPoint assignment. It's on page 969. That's how far we are into your curriculum, right? And it's going to tell you about doing this for week 21. Okay, you do not have to do a PowerPoint presentation for week 21. That is all moved to the end of the year, okay? That's your project at the end of the year. You will be doing a PowerPoint presentation on a biographical subject that you choose. You're going to do a biography of somebody. In history, don't choose an American, please. And choose somebody from the world history we've been studying right there, even though I know we've talked about some Americans. Also in week 25, you're going to see that assignment for the biography. So you're going to combine biography with PowerPoint presentation listed in week 21. Do you understand? Everybody get it? Okay. So that brings us to our schedule right here. You can see that this is the day we missed, this blue week right here. Around the world in 4 days. And the very beginning of the week, in week 20, which you're turning in today, yes? Okay, which would have been about China and Japan and all that business, right? I barely talk about that because I needed to get to what week 21 was. So I basically skipped week 20. Y'all didn't, but I did, okay? All right, so this week we're on week 22. I'm talking about week 22. It's about the Pre-Enlightenment in Europe, science and philosophy. The science part I can handle, right? But the philosophy is killing me. All right. Then the next week is week 23. I will split that into 2 weeks. Okay, that's going to be the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. I have 2 weeks for that. And then guess what's next? Look, spring break. It's already that close to spring break, y'all. That's crazy. All right. So then we'll have those presentations right here. So then in week 24... you will have this one. In week 25, it says biography assignment. That's all you have for you don't have any homework, but I'm going to keep going over here. This is me on this side. I'm going to do like Napoleon's 2 weeks, and I bring Victoria in early. All right, but nothing's due on 25 because 25, like I told you a second ago, is combined with your final project. Yes? Does everybody get it? Okay. And that why by the time we get to the end here at our project presentations, we will not have missed a week. Because the week we missed last week for the snow vid, I sent home to you.
Right.
And you should have watched it, but nobody watched it.
That video.
Everybody watched that video, yeah. But it's there for you. If you need me to resend it to you, I can. But you can actually go to YouTube and put in Cindy Casper, and you'll bring up every video I've ever made, okay? Which is a lot. Okay? But pick the right one. Pick the one that says World History Week, whatever. Now this one's going to be in there because I'm recording this right now. Okay, so make sure that don't pick this. You'll know right away because you'll see this stuff.
Don't rewatch.
Don't rewatch this. You will not want to rewatch this one, I promise you. Okay, so we are in what is known as the Pre-Enlightenment Europe. So nobody has any chocolate or anything we can fortify ourselves with? Reed, do you have enough for the whole class? No?
Nope.
Okay.
I've already
definitely
touched all of
does.
it. So.
All right. So, okay. I wish I had thought to bring, I have lots of chocolate at home I wish I brought. Just keep you awake is all I'm saying. Just keep you awake. Okay. Here we go. We're going to start with the scientists. Now, I can handle these guys. Okay, Nicholas Copernicus. Who knows what he did? He's an amazing guy. He's the guy that is looking at the stars, right? He's looking at the stars, and he's studying, and he's noticing, and he's very detail-oriented. And he knows whatever all the scientists before him have said, and namely a guy named Ptolemy. Ptolemy had come up with the idea that Earth was the center of our solar system. Of course, it doesn't make sense to call it a solar system if the Earth is in the center. It's called the geocentric model of our universe, okay? Which means Earth is in the center and everything is revolving around Earth. Okay, so Earth has a moon going around it, and then we know the planet Venus, we know the sun, we know the planet Mars. Those are all things that are seen in our sky, in our night night sky, okay, so known as heliocentric. All right, so Ptolemy is looking at this. He's observing things, and he says, it doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. There's something wrong with Ptolemy. And it's very difficult for a scientist. It would be like me saying, I think that Isaac Newton was wrong. I mean, come on. Nobody wants to be that person that says a very famous, brilliant person in the past was wrong. And so Ptolemy's looking at it. He does lots of data, and it hits him. He goes right away, he goes, okay, Ptolemy made a mistake. And the mistake is that the Earth is not the center of our universe. The center of our solar system is the sun. He said that the Earth is going around the sun. And all of his data pointed to it. Now, he realized that if he published this, it would be so earth-shattering that he'd be in trouble with the church and therefore the government. He would be excommunicated and probably arrested. So he made sure to tell his friends. He said, listen, here's the deal. He told his friends, and they were looking at his data. His friends are a bunch of geeky science people, and they said, oh, yeah, I think you're right, man. And so he said, here's the deal. You can publish this data of mine. I'm going to write it down in this book, but only after I'm dead. You can publish it then. And so they did, and it was immediately banned by the church as being heretical, okay? But other scientists did get a hold of it, and they're looking at it going, yeah, you know what? I think he has a point here. One of those guys is this guy, one of my favorites of the astronomers out there. Notice I didn't say astrologer. These are not people looking at your zodiac signs. No, these are people studying the stars. This is real science here, okay? So this is Tycho Brahe. I love Tycho Brahe. He's the one, if you've had me for younger classes, Reed, you might know this one. He's the one that was, he was a man about town, okay? He went to all the parties and things like this, and he used to get in lots of fights. And the kind of fights he got in were called duels. So people were challenging him to duels. And in one of the duels, they were using swords. His nose was cut off. So he got his nose sliced off, and that's okay. We can live without this part sticking off of our face, but you look kind of funny. So he ended up making these little caps that he would wear on his nose, over his nose, so he didn't look funny. And if he was going to a really fancy party, he had a gold cap, and he had a silver cap for not as fancy parties. So he wore those caps around. And furthermore, he had a pet moose that he liked to bring to the parties with him, and the favorite party game, of course, was to give the moose beer. And then the moose would be drunkenly falling downstairs. And then finally the moose fell down a flight of stairs and died. But it's kind of sad. But that's Tycho. He's a real character. Meanwhile, he was a serious scientist at the same time. And what he noticed is he takes the work of Copernicus and he starts looking at it more clearly, and he starts looking up in the sky. He had a really beautiful planetarium where his ceiling, opened up, and he could look at the sky at night from inside of his laboratory. And one of the things he noticed was he postulated the idea of a supernova, and that was what happens when a star dies. This was the whole story about the Chinese had reported this phenomenon that happened in year XYZ. He went and looked it back up. He trained a nice new telescope on there, and he saw something like this called the Crab Nebula. And he made the idea that what happens at stars at the end of their life is they explode. And that's called a supernova. So that was Tycho Brahe who came up with that. Here he is, by the way, with his cap on his nose. And there's his pet moose back there. All right. But his data, as he's looking at it and looking at what Copernicus said, he said, first of all, it's absolutely true that we're going around the sun. Okay, so but he's trying to keep that on the down low because he don't want to get in trouble. But he said the other thing I've noticed is that the orbits aren't completely round. They're actually more of a ellipse. Okay, and we show the ellipse like this so we can see it's an ellipse. It's actually just a little bit of a flattened circle. They really look a lot like a flattened circle to me. So he came up with that. It turns out we've discovered he is right in his mathematical calculations. And when he died, probably of partying too much or whatever, his student, Johannes Kepler, fought to get the paperwork. So he had been helping him all this time, and he fought to get all the papers of Brahe so he could keep those, so he could eventually publish them someday. But Brahe's family wanted to keep them. They thought they might be valuable. They thought that they might get in trouble or something like this. And Kepler knew everything that was true, and he actually snuck into the lab one night and stole the data that he wanted. So he did get it and was able to preserve it and therefore print it later, which did happen. Now, he was trying to tell a story, kind of an allegorical story about the way that the Earth is going around the sun without offending people. So he kind of turned it into a children's tale. And he made the person who was telling the tale a little fairy, but the fairy was his mom. Okay, so he named it. So it'd be like writing a story where you have a narrator who's this knows-all fairy person, and you made your mom the person. Okay. The problem is that people now thought that this was a true story. They didn't think it was just a little children's tale, and they accused Kepler's mother of being a witch. She was actually arrested for witchcraft. But he got her out of it. It was okay. But it was just kind of a crazy story right here. And here he is using some of the data right there to actually, I don't like to use this word when talking about science proof, okay? Because we can't prove anything. Science proves zero. It proves nothing. But it shows or illustrates pretty well that it's true that they were going in an elliptical orbit. Elliptical, not a round one. And that the sun was in the middle. Ivy put the phone away. All right. So we have the law of these that Kepler, so Kepler's law is the first law, elliptical orbit. The second law, the law of equal areas, an orbiting object will take the same amount of time to travel between points A and B as C and D. A and B, C and D, depending on where they are. And the square of a planet's orbital time is proportional to the average distance from the star cubed. Okay, moving on. All right, we don't need to, this is not science class, okay? So if you want to take an astronomy class, that's the kind of stuff you're going to study. And it gets mathematical, okay? All right. Galileo comes along, and he did not invent the telescope, but he did improve the telescope. And by doing that, he's in Italy. He's looking, all of these scientists were able to get a hold of Copernicus's works. He's reading Tycho Brahe, he's reading Kepler. He's looking at them, he goes, yeah, they're right. And he says, if you study Venus and the way it looks in its phases, like the phases of the moon around the Earth, it's absolutely clear that Venus is going around the sun, not going around the Earth. He said it's absolutely clear. Furthermore, he's looking at the other direction, at Jupiter, and the moons of Jupiter, and the way that the moons go around Jupiter and the way they look. He took that data versus what was happening in Venus, and he said it's absolutely, positively clear, scientifically, that we're all going around the sun. All right? These are called the Galilean moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. These are the first 4 of the 60-plus moons that go around Jupiter. Okay, he only saw 4 of them, but that's pretty good. All right, so when he made this statement, he actually published this work. He was arrested immediately. He was threatened with excommunication. And then he was taken into custody, and they said, you must recant your story about the Earth going around the sun. And so Galileo stood up in front of everybody, and he confessed. And he said, I confess, I recant that this data that I have that is very, very good data that absolutely positively shows we're going around the sun must be false, even though it absolutely positively shows we're going around the sun. So his recantation was a little bit, and they said, they were looking at him like, all right, well, I guess that's a recantation. But they kept him under house arrest. So he actually lived the rest of his life under house arrest in Pisa, the city of Pisa, which turned out to be okay, because under house arrest in Pisa, he could travel a little bit in the little town right there. And church was always, he could always go to church. So in church, this is kind of cool. Here he is standing in church. They had in the church this giant chandelier, okay? But we think about chandeliers being a big light, But this was lit with oil. It had oil in it, or a candle, or whatever was lit. So every day they had to light it. So to light it, the guy had to get a string, grab a hold of it, pull it all the way up to the upper balcony here, light it, and then let it go. And then it did this, whoosh, whoosh. And so every day Galileo would be there to watch the lighting of this lamp. And it turned into a pendulum that eventually, stopped. He's timing it going with the pulse on his arm, and he realized that the period in which it took to swing back and forth was equal every time. And it had to do with the mass of the pendulum, the light itself. And so he came up with the law of the pendulum by watching that happen that way. So pretty cool. Apparently this is where he's looking up at the light. I don't know if that's the light right there. Maybe it is. Not sure. Okay, he also went to that famous tower. This really happened. He really did drop things off the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And he realized, like, he dropped a mini ball. A mini ball is like a bullet from a gun like this, yes, lead. And a cannonball like this, lead. Dropped them both at the same time. What happened? They hit the ground at the same time. Okay? Now, it was difficult as he's standing up there to look down and say, did they hit the ground at the same time? So he's standing below. They're dropping it. It's not very quantitative. You can't really get, the data can't really be measured very well. They look like they hit the ground at the same time. Okay. So we did another one here where he's rolling out down a ramp, and he was able to time it once again, something like this, right? And he realized that as it went down, as it came down the ramp, it picked up speed. So it's faster the second half of the ramp than it is the first half of the ramp. All right? Which came up with the idea of acceleration due to gravity. In other words, it's gravity that's pulling us all to the ground at the same rate. It doesn't matter what it is. It just matters where it is on the earth. So you've all taken science where we drop the book and the piece of paper and the book hits first in the paper. Well, but then we crunch the paper up and then they both hit at the same time, right? All right. And then in my science classes, I show the guy on the moon dropping the feather and the hammer, and they hit the ground at the same time because there's no air on the moon to stop it. All right, so anything that's stopped is stopped by air. So cool stuff. This is him recanting, saying, yes, I admit that I was wrong, even though everything I have shows that I'm right. Yeah, okay. Then comes Isaac Newton, probably the most famous of the, since the time of the Greeks, right? Comes Isaac Newton, brilliant man. To have ever lived, he's one of my favorite guys, okay? He developed the theory of gravity, and we're talking about universal gravity, not just that this falling to the ground is gravity, but the thing that keeps the moon around the earth is also gravity, that keeps the earth around the sun. He admitted it out loud, and he didn't get arrested for it. He's in England, maybe they're more enlightened, I don't know. He showed that light is composed of all the colors of the spectrum. He worked with optics, prisms, things like this. He invented calculus. Oh, boo. He had to invent calculus. And in fact, we're going to talk about another guy today, one of our philosophers who said, Newton didn't invent calculus, I did. So there is a little bit, to this day, a controversy who did it. I'm going to say Newton. Okay. He had to do it in order to explain the stuff he was studying. He had to invent new math to explain this stuff. He built the first reflecting telescope. Those are the big ones that you look down in this end, like you're looking like this, and it's pointing up that one, has giant mirrors in it. They are better, actually, than the refracting telescopes like Galileo was using. He was a man of God, and he revered the Bible. He spent his last days studying and researching the book of Daniel, and he applied math to the predictions of Daniel, the 70 weeks of Daniel, and he predicts that the world will end in the year 2060. We're getting kind of close to that. Yeah. Okay? Now, the Bible also tells us no man knows the day or the hour. So even the most brilliant man to have ever lived, we can't trust him for something like that. Okay? But I read something else today about, Halley's Comet's coming back in 2061. Something, maybe things are going to, I don't know if I'll be here in 2060. I'll have to really be old. I'll have to really hang on if I want to see Halley's Comet or see if Isaac Newton was right. I'll be like 98 or something like that. Okay, so he comes up with these laws of physics. Now, when he's doing that, he's a man of God. Everything he studies, he says, this shows the reflection of God. It's awesome. It's just really giving me this appreciation for God. But other people are like saying, well, hey, if this stuff is so scientifically explainable, who needs God? We can explain it by natural means, by natural things. That's where we're moving. Okay, we're not there yet, but we're moving toward. This is called the Pre-Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is going to go all the way to say, who needs God? Okay? So remember, we had humanism, kind of started things a little bit, that humans are greatly endowed by God with really great creativity and all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of this thing about let's look at humans' abilities. All right, then we're going to see a questioning of the church with the Reformation, and that's going to all move toward where we are now, which is chaos and meaninglessness. Sorry, but sad, right? So laws of physics. Okay. Laws of motion, y'all know these. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest unless acted upon by an unbalanced force. Is anybody here taking physics, or will you be taking physics? You're taking it now?
Yep.
Okay. Where do you take it?
ATC.
Oh, how is it?
Our professor is pretty boring, but the actual stuff is fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of math in there.
Yeah.
It nearly drove me insane when I taught it to my children. I mean, I'm literally, I'm crying. I was crying at home. Then I had to pray about it. It was hard. I find it difficult. But this is just physical science, so this is okay. The second law of motion states F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. And the third law says that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So that first law is also known as the law of inertia. Here it is, and keeps moving. Yeah, and boom. Yeah, so that's that, okay. Then we have force equals mass times acceleration. It's very simple. Would you rather be hit by a falling elephant or a falling mouse?
Mouse.
Okay, yeah, because the elephant will squish you. It's kind of like if you're getting hit by a Mack truck or a bicycle, right? There's going to be a difference in the force in which it hits you because of the mass behind it. And furthermore, how fast can it go? All right, so that's pretty, I will tell you that all of these, here's another one. Do you want to kick that or that? Do you want to kick a bowling ball or a soccer ball? Okay. So there's much more mass right there. So therefore the force is going to be more against your foot right there. All right, third law, if I push against this wall, you have to believe the wall's pushing back against me. Seems a little theoretical there, but that's the truth. That's what the laws state. Now they're called scientific laws because we have studied them and studied them and studied them over time, and they haven't been disproven. So I can't say they're proven because nothing's ever proven. Just because someone wears a lab coat doesn't make them right, okay? It's not, but it hasn't been disproven, all right? So that's why they can be called a law. There's very few things that are actually scientific laws because it's difficult to get to that. All right, so he starts to see I want you to see this word right here, ready? Rational. There's a rational view of the universe, okay? It's not magic. Magic is not pulling things down to the earth. Gravity is, and it's a force that's there for a reason based on mass. We still don't quite understand every bit of it. We also don't understand very well is magnetism. We just don't. We know what they do. They're very predictable. We don't know exactly why. Yeah, so we don't know everything for sure. But there does seem to be a rational explanation for all this scientific stuff. All right, for the world around us, for stars, for eclipses, for everything. It's not superstition. We can replace superstition now. But sadly, it's also going to replace faith as well. Here he is with all his stuff. He was, into the stars. He did the light deal right here. He talked about, here's our apple falling, all that business right there. So he believes then, therefore, there is something known as natural law. It's already here. It's been established. He would say, and I would say, God established this natural law. All right, but it's going to morph. Okay, Francis Bacon. We've met Francis Bacon. In fact, I have the video here. We're not going to watch it because we've already seen it about the ghost chicken. Yeah. This is ghost chicken guy, right? So, but he came up with the idea of inductive and deductive reasoning, that we should base science off empirical evidence, and we should do lots of labs and lots of experiments to support whatever hypothesis we've been making. All right, we can't just say something and say it's true because, but we have to have a scientific method to do that. So he came up with the idea of the scientific method, and then of course we know he died after the whole chicken incident because he was out in the cold. And he froze, he didn't freeze to death, he caught a cold and died. Okay, Robert Boyle, those of you who are in chemistry, we talked about Robert Boyle this week, okay? The gas laws, right? And the proportionality of the P1, V1 equals P2, V2, yeah? Constant chemistry, guys, does that sound familiar at all? Yeah, okay. Now we're gonna go to philosophy, okay? So I just need y'all to just maybe do some jumping jacks, I don't know, something.
Stay awake. We'll try.
I'm just gonna, let me have a junior mint, hold on. I need a junior mint. Okay, so philosophy gives me a headache anyway. And so let's see if we can make sense of it. All right, here we go. This is all called modern philosophy, by the way. Okay, so we're talking pre-Enlightenment Europe is modern philosophy. It's based on something known as rationalism. Remember I told you earlier that word rational. And there's an explanation for everything. Do you know anybody who's a really deep thinker? You know some deep thinkers out there? I am not a deep thinker. I'm a shallow thinker. So when I have to think deeply, it makes my head hurt. These guys are all thinking way too much. Way too much. Okay. So in the 17th century, which is where we are right now, in our history, not in reality, okay, we have reason versus empiricism. Empiricism is what John Locke talked about. He talked about empiricism is to show me. Like, if you tell me something's true, I need you to show it to me. That's empiricism. I need to see it, feel it, touch it, taste it, smell it, something. All right? And that idea here is also, we're going to write in here in the parentheses, theism, meaning all this makes sense because there's a God that makes this make sense. Okay? God put it there. The final answer to everything is God did it. Final answer in Sunday school, Jesus, right? Jesus did it. Okay. All right. Then comes the 18th century. That's what we'll talk about next week. And we have reason versus revelation. In other words, the things I know about things is they've been revealed to me. Revealed to me maybe by God, maybe by study. All right? And we're going to move into something known as deism, and that's the idea. I have the clock thing over here. The idea of a watchmaker God. You know this one? The watchmaker God. He made it. It was obviously designed because there's no denying the design of it. He wound up the clock and walked away. Okay, the only problem with that is it denies any kind of involvement of God with his creation. Okay, so some of our founding fathers in America were deists, unfortunately, but they still believed in a God, at least. All right, then we move into the 19th century. We have reason versus God himself, which is atheism. In other words, turning against God, reason becomes God. All right? And then we have 20th century and 21st, y'all. We have chaos and despair. That's our philosophy now. It's actually based on something called absurdism, that life is meaningless, so why do we care? Okay. Now, of course, I'm not talking to y'all, because during all of this, these people who are thinking too much, right, they're coming up with this stuff, and they're wrong. They're wrong about deists are wrong. Theists are wrong. Deists are wrong. Atheists are certainly wrong. And then absurdists are wrong. Okay? All through this time in history, there is something we call a remnant. And the remnant are the people of God who still believe in the truth of God. Okay? Because truth is truth, regardless of what smart people say. And you're going to find the truth only in one place, and that is the Word of God. That's it. Okay? And people who go to secular schools, they don't get that part of the puzzle. And if you don't have that part of the puzzle, your puzzle won't make sense. All right, but let's see what these guys, how they got to this, if we must. Okay, I do like René Descartes. Y'all doing any geometry? You know, when you plot points on a graph, that's called Cartesian geometry. That's based on Descartes. Okay, he's brilliant. He's French. Okay, and so he wrote a couple of books. One of them is called Pensée, and he has these different ideas. So let's see if we can figure out these ideas. These pensées, these thoughts. I've had these thoughts, and here they are. Number one, in order to seek truth, it is necessary once in the course of our life to doubt, as far as possible, everything. Doubt everything. Everything you see, taste. Oh, he's going to doubt empiricism. You see? If I can see it, taste it, touch it, I'm going to doubt it. So in my opinion, I don't know if anybody else sees it this way. I'm talking about philosophers. I see Descartes as a pessimist. I'm going to doubt everything. Okay, so if I'm doubting everything, then number two, we ought to consider as false all that is doubtful. So if I doubt it, that means it's not true. All right, if I doubt it, it's not true. That's kind of a jump if you ask me. Then comes number three, that we ought not, meanwhile, to make use of doubt to conduct our life. In other words, we shouldn't let all this doubt make us not enjoy life. Really, Descartes? I'm starting to not enjoy life just listening to your pensée. All right, number four. It's okay to doubt sensible things. I sense them. So I'm tasting my junior man. It tastes good. Oh, I doubt it. I doubt that's good. You know, I don't know. He's thinking too much. Okay, then we have this idea of rationalism. We arrive at truth through reason rather than through our senses. We have to reason it out, not experience it out, not flesh it out. We have to reason it out right here. So he says this, we may also doubt mathematics like this. This one I'll hold to. Let's doubt mathematical demonstrations. I will doubt math all day long, yeah. Except I do believe 2 + 2 does equal 4. I really do, and I don't think there's any way around it. Number 6, that we will possess free will by which we can withhold or assent from what is doubtful and thus avoid error. Okay, so I still have a choice here. You say that's true, I say I doubt it. And I'm okay, I'm free to do that. Number 7, we cannot doubt of our existence while we doubt. The fact that I'm doubting proves that I'm here. He has a very famous quote. I know, huh? Yeah. Okay. That this is the first knowledge we acquire when we philosophize in order, which comes up to cogito ergo sum. Who's my Latin people in here? This is his famous, I think, therefore I am. If I'm thinking about something, if I'm doubting it, then I must be here. I must be real. This is the whole thing. Am I real? Is this a fantasy that I'm walking around? Is this the Matrix? You know, that kind of thing? But if I'm thinking it and doubting it, then it must be real. But I don't know if y'all are real. But I know that I'm real. Y'all could all be a figment of my imagination. I'm sure right now you were hoping that I were a figment of yours. But I'm not. I'm here, okay? So he says,
No, I doubt that.
I think, therefore I am. And he comes up with this I thank you for doubting that. That was very Descartesian of you. We have 2 types of substance. We have our mind and our body. So materialism is empiricism. I can see it, I can do it, I can taste it, I can touch it. And that is senses only. But rationalism is my mind plus my senses I'll let my senses inform my mind after I've gone through a big bunch of doubt. Okay, so I think, therefore I am. That is Rene Descartes. All right, the next person in this group, the same group, I gotta like this guy. Okay, Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz, but most people pronounce it Leibniz, so I'll call him Leibniz, if that's what they want to call it. Okay, he does have a really very nice hairdo. It is a wig. Okay. Now what he said was different than what, instead of doubting everything, what he said was, look, if there is a God, then he's got to be all-powerful and all-knowing. Therefore, he had to create something that's the best possible of all worlds. Okay, he had to create something that was creative and good. Okay, because he's God. Okay, so this is, here's the glass half full. He, in my opinion, is an optimist. All right, now we're going to see next week a guy who criticizes this guy like crazy in a very funny way. He says, really, we live in the best of all possible worlds? You know, you're a total optimist? So if you know anybody who's an optimist, I'm an optimist. I think, how bad can it be? How bad? How bad can it be not having electricity for 5 days? Well, when it's 2 degrees outside. Well, it's pretty bad, you know, but I'm an optimist. The electricity is going to come back on. Our country's going to be okay, even though it's being run into the ground right now. I believe everything's going to be okay. All right? So I'm with Leibniz right there on that one. Then we get this guy, Baruch Spinoza. All right. The highest activity a human being can attain is learning for understanding, because to understand is to be free. I like that quote, okay? You shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free, is what he's saying right there. Okay, he is a Jewish man. He was born in Portugal to a Spanish family who had been kicked out of Spain because of Isabel and Ferdinand, who got rid of the Jews, yes. They had to leave Portugal as well. And so they fled away, and I think they ended up in Flanders or someplace that was a little more friendly to Jews coming there. But then he rejected Judaism, and this is him kind of taking on the whole kind of Puritan dress, the garb right there. And the Jews over here are horrified. Look, they don't even want to get close to him because they're like, what is wrong with this guy? So I'm trying to figure out what his philosophy is. I've watched several videos, and I'm still a little lost on Spinoza. Here's what I'll say. I think at the bottom of it, he believes in God, but he believes in certainly not a personal God, but maybe like everything is God. So kind of a
New Age.
Yeah, maybe New Age. I'm trying to use the word pantheism, but that's not quite right? Because pantheism would be lots of gods. But it's not lots of gods. It's like everything's God, like God's all around us. And he's trying to explain things that way. But what he comes down to, I literally looked up, Spinoza for dummies. Can I just have the bottom line right here? Essentially, it was we need freedom to pursue knowledge, so the knowledge will lead me to truth. And so if we're free to pursue knowledge, then we will come to truth, but it'll always be biblical truth in my mind, right? So he rejected that. Most people today who really admire Spinoza say that he was an atheist, and I think they're wrong. And they say that they're atheists in the way of Spinoza. Now here's a modern guy who said this: I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the harmony of all that exists, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and doings of mankind. So not the Christian God, but a force. How about that? A Star Wars God. Force. May the force be with you. Right. All right. So we're going to take some of this philosophy and we're going to combine it a little bit with politics. So this is a British guy called Hobbes. He and John Locke were fighting against each other as far as philosophical politics, kind of a thing. So he wrote a book called Leviathan, which is an allegory of Leviathan's a giant monster or whatever, and it's going to be an allegory. He argued that people are naturally cruel and greedy and selfish. That's how they are. And only a powerful government can ensure an orderly society. So a government like an absolute monarchy. So he would have supported the monarchy over any kind of freedom or whatever. Opinions have been shaped by living through the English Civil Wars. So the Civil Wars, which we talked about, did I talk about that in your... Yes, thank you, Reed, the only person who watched it. That we did talk about the English Civil War last time. Okay, he locked horns with this guy. This is John Locke, who said that, he right here, let's see. The government is only there to protect the rights of the people. The rights of the people are natural. They're God-given. Okay? And that people aren't naturally bad, necessarily. The good can come out of people if you don't oppress them. All right? So he's going to say things like this. True legitimate government is based on the social contract and natural rights. We get that from Newton. Natural rights. Those natural rights, that natural law is that God has given natural rights to you and me. And I'm going to tell you, do you know what the rights are that God has given? According to Locke, I'll tell you what they are right here. First of all, the consent of the governed, the people, the government is not over the people, the government is for the people. It's going to support them and help them. The people are in charge of the government's not in charge of the people. Does this sound a little bit familiar? Something like maybe American Constitution?
Mark.
America. So he believed in a rational view of government, these natural rights. And those natural rights are, anybody? Life, liberty, and property. Now the Americans had to change that third one. The third one because there were people saying, what does property have to do with this kind of thing? But Thomas Jefferson wanted property in there because he was a Locke guy. He was Lockean. He agreed with what Locke said. And he wanted to put property in there, but he said, okay, well, let's put in pursuit of happiness, which guess what that pursuit's going to be? Getting some private property. Okay, that's part of my pursuit of happiness right there. All right, so this is Locke who did this. So major influence on American government right here. Okay. Are we done with philosophy? Because now we're moving to something a little more interesting.
Yay,
Witchcraft. So because what's happening, all this doubt that's going on, all of this questioning of what is true and this kind of thing led to things like this. Okay, there were people who were believing weird stuff, including things that would be considered witchcraft. Furthermore, there are people who, just because they're a little different, other people said, oh, witch, she must be a witch because she's, dunk her, whatever the deal is. But it was really happening. There were some people who were straying from the truth of the Bible and looking up other things. Even Spinoza could be one of those guys right there, okay? And maybe looking possibly for power in different places besides God. So were there real witches? I think the witch scare that went on, which did translate over to America, we know that, in Salem, was mostly hysterical, right? Mostly hysterical. People afraid of stuff. They were fearful that these people who are a little different might cast a spell on them or something like that, voodoo doll, stuff like that, okay? So there were witches and witch hunts that went on. So if somebody, it did get to the point where if you just didn't like somebody very much, you might whisper, I think she's a witch, and then things would just be carried from there. So this is the dunking pole right here. So you know how this worked, right? That they tie you to this pole and they dunk you underwater for a certain amount of time and they pull you up. Now, if you were drowned when you come up, you were innocent. Of course, you were drowned. You were dead. But if you came up and you were still alive, you were a witch, so they'll put you to death for being a witch. Okay, so they were horrible. They were terrible. It's called the dunking stool or the dunking chair or some dunking pole, something like that. Here we go. This was Macbeth by Shakespeare, and he incorporated some of this witchcraft into that because it really was kind of this thing going around, and he had these three witches, and that's the whole double, toil and trouble, fire burning, cauldron bubble. They're kind of little, and that really actually played into some of the fears and some of the stereotypes of what witches do. And these people were, eye of newt and wing of bat, and that really happens in the play of Macbeth, and they're stirring it together and making a potion, giving it to Macbeth, and he's able to successfully kill the king and become the king himself and all this kind of stuff. All right, so Shakespeare, we have him to thank for some of that lore, if you will, about witches. All right, so superstitions, right? So these philosophers are trying to get rid of it. They're trying to move that superstition out of that, okay? And as it moves along, they're starting to say, like Spinoza, the idea of deism. So deism is our watchmaker God. So I think I have here, y'all can't read this, but so deism is the belief in the existence of a supreme being, specifically a creator who does not intervene in the universe. Whereas theism is the belief in the existence of God or gods, specifically a creator who intervenes in the universe. So you can see how this could be like what the Greeks believed in. If they believed in lots of gods, they definitely were involved in humans, right? They were throwing lightning bolts at them and usually doing horrible things to them, and helping them win battles or helping them lose battles or this kind of thing. Here's our watchmaker. So the idea that he makes this beautiful thing, winds it up, and then lets it tick away and doesn't have any, he just leaves it. Okay, so that would be like what a lot of Americans, founding fathers did. I think Benjamin Franklin in particular had that belief system. All right, Blaise Pascal. Did we talk about him in chemistry too, Pascal? There's a unit of power named after him. He actually invented this. I believe that is the first calculator. Is that right? Yeah, it's like a mechanical calculator of some sort right there. He's another French guy that came along, but he is still holding on. So he's a scientist again, but he's still holding on to where Newton was. So his great quote is this: "There is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man which cannot be filled by any created thing, but only by God the Creator made known through Jesus." So that's very clear. So he came up with something called Pascal's wager, and I think it might actually still work today. If you want to try to talk to somebody who's just like, why should I even consider if there's a God? Who cares? You know, they're in the chaos and the whole hopelessness thing, right? You're going to meet up with these postmodern people because that's your generation, all right, that may have lost their way. They haven't been brought up in a home that believes in God, that kind of thing. So you can give them Pascal's wager. It says this: okay, believe in God. Go ahead and believe in God. If you are right, okay, if you're right. If you believe in God and you're right, you have infinite gain. If you believe in God and you're wrong, nothing happens. Okay? But if you don't believe in God and you're right, nothing happens. Okay? But if you don't believe in God and you're wrong, you have infinite loss. So why don't you just go ahead and believe in God? Okay, so I understand that, but except he's not appealing to us on a spiritual sense. He's appealing to his audience on a philosophical sense. And it's pretty good, you know. But really the only way to get to know, have a relationship with God is to have a personal relationship with God, is to receive Christ personally, right? And you have a conversion in your heart. Okay, yes?
I've heard a couple stories of like someone who initially started believing in God because of that and just faked it essentially until they actually started believing in God just from doing it enough. It was really weird.
Well, but that's good, you know, because for instance, we could say, let's just assume there's a God. And then as time goes by, and then they start to attribute more and more to God. You know, yesterday I was driving home from class. I got out a little bit late because of our biology lab. Took long because we had to do 2 dissections because of last week or whatever. But I'm driving home, and I'm almost to my house, and right past my window flies this gorgeous golden hawk. And I just had to say, well, thank you, God, for that. Because here I'm kind of like mad, you know, it's kind of late, and then I have this beautiful thing. All right, so I can see God in something like that. I see God in science, like in the microscope and stuff like that. I see that. Roman.
I feel like he's saying not why you should, but why you shouldn't not believe in God.
Okay, yeah, because but see, it's still appealing to us on a philosophical level, right?
Yeah.
And it makes a point. I think it's a good point.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt to go ahead and believe in God. Yeah, I like that. It's reasonable, right? It's rational. It's rational. You doubt that? Thank you, Descartes, over there. Yeah. Okay, then we come to something known as pietism. So on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who still are people of faith. They're going to move toward, instead of a religious kind of a formal, so when I say religious, it doesn't necessarily mean spiritual. Do you understand? It means I'm going through the motions. I'm going to Sunday church. I'm paying my tithe. I'm checking off those boxes, but I may not have any inward relationship with God. Okay, so just because I'm being a good churchgoer doesn't make me a Christian. So pietists are going to say, let's pursue personal relationship. Okay, so this is the other end of the philosophical spectrum right now. This is Philip Jakob Spener. So he said that we need to have Bible study. You can't just go to Sunday church, listen to the sermon, and go home and be fine with it. You need to study the Bible on your own. I'm in complete agreement with that. Okay, so I don't know about y'all. I study the Bible every day. I try to. Sometimes I miss it. Okay, or you go to a Bible study where you're forced to do some homework, and therefore you have this accountability. Right? That's always a good thing too. It says you should serve in church, not just go to church, but do something so that they need you and that you have a responsibility. Love one another. I like that one. Okay. Be a good example. How are we doing? Ministers should be godly. Oh, that's not a tall order. Ministers should be good people. I think that goes without saying, right? And preach God's word humbly. Know that you are a recipient of this great grace of God and that you shouldn't have any pride about that right there. This leads us to our Puritans. Okay, so our Puritans in England, and remember the separatists? who took themselves apart to study things apart. And they come up with the Westminster Confession of Faith to say, what is it that we really, really believe in? This is during the time of Cromwell, which you missed from last week's lecture. Cromwell, except for reading, yes. Cromwell took over. They actually, here I'm going to be a spoiler alert ready. They actually cut off the king's head. They executed the King of England. The only King of England ever be executed was Charles I. Yeah, and it happened. And Cromwell takes over, and he's a Puritan, and they come up with this statement of faith of what they really believe in as a group. And it became kind of the state religion, if you will, okay? Our separatists are going to be our ones who left, right? These are the ones that ended up in America. This is the first Thanksgiving. We talked about these guys already, right? But let's look at these guys, the Puritans, a little bit. Some people talk about their clothing here. This is how we typically think about a pilgrim looking with a very, stoic thing like this. But it turns out they actually wore lots of colorful clothes, just not on Sunday. Sunday church, they tended to wear the black clothes like this, but they had colorful clothes the other days of the week. Here's a guy wearing much more colorful clothes. Okay, but they did consider their personal relationship with God to be one of the most important relationships in their whole life. Okay, so you got to admire them for that. This is Charles II. Now, if you had seen what happened in last week when we were together electronically, we talked about Charles I being executed, and his son had to run away, and he ran away to France, and he hid there for several years while Cromwell ran the country as what is called the Lord Protector, or the Commonwealth era of England. Okay, but after that end, after Cromwell died of natural causes, he was an older guy, he was a Puritan, but he died, and his son was not equipped to take over after him. Besides, that's not really how that was supposed to work. The people of England said, well, what are we going to do? And they said, maybe we need a king after all. And they put out a request to Charles, who was over there in France, and they said, would you please come back and be the king? And he said, I've been waiting all this time for you to ask me. And they said, well, we have a couple of criteria. Number one, you have to be willing to operate under a constitutional monarchy. In other words, you're under the law like we are. We have certain rights, namely habeas corpus, things like this. He agreed to that, came back. It's called the Restoration, and now he's the king. And during this time, though, at this point, these separatists was still illegal, and these people were off, sneaking off to go to church on their own. Okay, but Charles II is going to help to rectify that a little bit to make it a little more easy for these people to have their religion, have their freedom of religion. But remember, those guys left England to go to America to pursue freedom in their religion. That's why they left. So don't let people tell you anything different. That is why they left. All right, at this time we have a Puritan. His name is John Bunyan. Have you heard of him? Okay. He was actually jailed for being a separatist. And while he was in jail, he wrote a book that maybe you've read, or maybe you've seen a little cartoon about it, called The Pilgrim's Progress. Okay, it's an allegory tale about the life of a Christian. The main character's name is Christian, and he's carrying his big bag, and and it's really very good. Have you had to read it for literature class? No? It's good. It's not very long either, so it's all right. Okay, so now we're done with these guys, and we get to look at the driving force on the other end at the Counter-Reformation Catholic Church. We're going to look at art. Okay, yay. I like art. Okay, so this is a new type of art. From Renaissance art, it's going to now transition into something known as Baroque art. It's Baroque art. And this painting right here is one of my favorites of all time. It's by this painter. His name is Caravaggio. Now, Caravaggio, his name is Michelangelo Merisi di Caravaggio. His parents named him after Michelangelo on purpose. He was from a little town near a little town called Caravaggio. They had to leave their town when there was a plague to go to the town called Caravaggio, and he started being known as the guy, that painter from Caravaggio. So he just called himself Caravaggio, one name, right? Rock star. And so he is our Baroque painter, and he ended up in Milan, where he became very famous. Now, he's one of my favorite painters. His story is notorious. Okay, he's not a good guy. He murdered somebody, in a bar fight. He got in lots and lots of street fights. In fact, he ends up dying early from infections that he got from somebody beating him up. Yeah, so it's kind of a sad tale, but he was super talented. Here's one of his early paintings. You can see here, it's just, there's a boy, I don't know what he's doing, peeling an apple. I don't know what he's doing. A potato. I don't know what he's doing. But it doesn't matter. We're not painting a portrait of somebody to show this is this grand, with all the grand symbolism. No, it's a guy peeling a potato. You know, this is an unusual subject. It's kind of like what we're going to call it a genre painting. It'd be like if I painted one of you sitting there watching me speak. You'd be like, I mean, you know, you're just like, and there's nothing really important about that except it's happening right now. It's if I took a picture of you, yeah? Okay. So he's taking a picture of an event that's taking place. This is very common type of Caravaggio. It's Caravaggio-esque, very young Caravaggio. This would be a classical type of a thing, sort of like we're looking back at ancient Rome or something like this. I think it's called The Guitar Player, and there he is with his guitar. And one thing I want you to notice is, even on this one right here, notice there's light coming in from a source that we don't know where that light's coming from. It's like it has a spotlight on it, okay? But keep in mind, there's no electricity, right? So we don't know anything about that. We have a spotlight coming in right here. It's kind of unusual. We're looking at somebody's back right there. That's weird that would be in a painting. He obviously put it in there on purpose. You know, it's not like took a bad photo, you know. This next painting is actually in Texas. You can go see it in Fort Worth at the Kimball Art Museum. I really love it. It's called Card Sharps. And it's about, they're cheating this poor guy right here. Here's this guy telling this guy what he's got in his hand, and he's reaching back here to get out the proper card to win. All right, so Card Sharps. It's pretty large. And once again, I want you to see that light coming in right here. And notice that this guy, the innocent guy, has the light mostly on him. And our bad guy, he's in the dark, okay, because he's bad. So we have our light and our dark, our chiaroscuro, just like Da Vinci used to do. And we're just looking at that little thing going on. This is one of his famous, I don't like this painting, called Bacchus. Bacchus would be the god of wine and partying. And you can see he's holding this glass of wine, which is amazing. The glass that's see-through, and you can see this. I don't know. I'm not a painter. I can't figure out how they did it. But I also want you to notice, let's see here. Can't really tell here. But right here, we're going to see lots of our subject matter are left-handed. And there's supposedly an explanation for this. And the explanation was that Caravaggio was cheating in his painting. All right? And I'll show you in a minute how that works. It's through something called a camera obscura. Do you know what a camera obscura is? Let's say I had a wall and a little pinhole in it, and I had something on this side, that light that's shining from here into a dark room would project that image onto a wall in the dark room, and it would be upside down and backwards. And so he would be painting this person, and they ended up left-handed because of it. Okay, there's all sorts of controversy in the art world about this. I'm thinking even if he used a camera obscura to help him outline where everything went, he still painted this. Okay, he still had to put the paint on the canvas to make it look like this. Am I making any sense to y'all? It's not confusing to you? Okay. Here we go. Look at this. This is the ecstasy of St. Francis in ecstasy. You see our light coming in, hitting Francis, knocking him down. He's being caught by an angel. All right, we see that drama there. He's working for the church at this point. The church paid him for his work. They paid him nicely. And he ended up still living in slummy areas and using bums for his models. He was one of these guys that always used models, and somehow he was able to shine light on them. So this guy was a bum from the street, and he's modeling as St. Francis. And some people recognized him. They were like, oh, I know that guy. He's a bum from the street, and he's St. Francis? This is wrong. You know, so Caravaggio kind of had a bad reputation about stuff like this. This guy tends to show up a lot of places, maybe a model he had with him or something. He looks like the guy in the painting with the guy with the guitar, right? So he became the most famous painter in Rome. So he was working in Rome for the church, but there were certain times when he had to leave because he was in trouble. He got into a fight or something like that. But this painting he made is called The Supper at Emmaus. It's the story of Jesus. Now, do you remember what happened at Supper at Emmaus? This is after Jesus has risen from the dead. And these guys, two of the apostles, are walking down the road, and they're sad because Jesus is dead. And a third person joins up to him and says, hey, what are you so sad about? Well, you know, Jesus, he died. And the guy says, oh, that's an interesting story. That's great. They get to the place where they're going. They sit down to dinner. The third person starts to say a prayer, and at that moment they recognize it's Jesus. That's in the book of Acts, right? Okay? So, he was commissioned to paint this. Notice our light coming in. Right here, here's our two apostles. They've just found out, it's Jesus. So we see motion, we see his hand coming out. We see this guy fixing to stand up, this kind of thing. Now, what is wrong with Jesus? Do you recognize him? He doesn't have a beard. It's hard to tell it's Jesus, okay? And so Caravaggio had a point here, didn't he? He said they didn't recognize him. So I have to paint him unrecognizable. Well, the person that ordered this painting, the person who commissioned this painting said, I hate it. Go back and do it again. So we did. And it came up with this one. Now, can you recognize Jesus a little bit better on that one? Same thing's happening. Lights coming in. Hand coming out. These guys are surprised. He was kind of mad that the person made him paint it again, so he's not very happy. I'm going to go back for a second. I want you to see this. This is what we call a tour de force. This is a painting within a painting. He has here, when he was younger and he had to be working under the masters, the thing he had to paint was the stuff that was sitting on the table. Now that now today is called still life, but it wasn't considered art at the time. But I want you to see, we're going to close up to that one after this. Look at that. The basket's hanging off the table. This is big enough, it's kind of full size almost, full life. And if you were standing in front of it, you feel like you want to go and push that basket onto the table, it's fixing to fall off. You know, it's just so real looking, the way it's coming out at us. Our shadows are good. Look at the fruit. It looks edible. There's even a bruise on the apple. If you're painting your basket of fruit, you don't want to bruise the apple, but if it's already bruised, you know, he's going to paint it realistically, right? Here's my favorite painting. I think Caravaggio is my favorite artist. And here's my favorite painting. This is called The Conversion of St. Paul. Okay, you've seen this before. Especially if you took general science with me, because we talked about it. This is Paul laying on the ground after he's been knocked off of his horse. Look, smack in the middle of the painting, I got an elbow of a horse. That's weird. You'd think the middle of my painting would be the most important thing in my painting. Well, the elbow of a horse is not very important, right? So it's kind of interesting. He's swirling our attention around, swirling it down to here. This ecstasy, the light has knocked him off the horse. And now it's shining right on him right there, and you can see him. Does that look like Paul? Let's get a little closer. No, that doesn't look like Paul. That looks like a Roman soldier, a young, handsome Roman soldier. So guess what? The guy who commissioned the painting said, I hate it. That doesn't look like Paul. Repaint it. And Caravaggio said, oh, fine, I'll repaint. So here's the repainting. There's Paul. Looks a little more like Paul, but he's still wearing Roman garb. Why would Paul be wearing Roman garb? He was a Roman citizen. Okay, that's what Caravaggio. I think that the guy who ordered it also rejected this one. So they said, no, I'm not going to pay for that. And so, but now he's famous enough that everybody else is clamoring for his paintings. Okay, they're still some of the most famous paintings in the whole wide world. Since he had a shorter life, he doesn't have that many to see. So the one that we have in Texas is a huge coup. They actually had a Caravaggio exhibit a few years back, and I went to go see it. And they had several of these paintings. It was fabulous, fabulous. Oh, this is another one of my favorite charts. It's called The Calling of St. Matthew. Did we talk about this when we talked about St. Matthew? No? Okay. Now, I want you to see what's going on here. We're in a bar. Caravaggio was very familiar with bars. Spent a lot of time there. So we're in a bar. We have light. Looks like a window right here, but light's coming down. It's shining right on here. He's going, who, me? That's Matthew. Look at Jesus right here. Look at his hand. Does that remind you of anything? That is absolutely an homage to Michelangelo right there. It's an homage to him. We also see another hand pointing here as well, a little weaker, but this one's pointing, but that's a Michelangelo point for sure. He's saying, who, me? Are you talking to me? You know, Matthew, who's... Now, also, take a look. What's Jesus wearing and whoever this is? Let's say it's Peter. What are they wearing? Like biblical type clothes, right? What are these guys wearing? Renaissance clothes. More modern type clothes. Okay, so the idea here is that Jesus is saying that to Matthew, but he's also pointing at you. He's pointing at you, the modern person. He's calling you, and it's you saying me. You talking me? This kind of thing right here. Here's that hand pointing right there. Here's Matthew saying who, me? Yeah. And then I'll show you a little bit of the geometry going on right here. We can see the lines, and then of course our light line follows along that shadow right there. Okay. Here's another one. The sacrifice of Isaac. Light coming from here on Isaac's face. Abraham's fixing to kill his son. The angel stops him. You can see his thumb imprint on his son's face. I mean, it's just, it's incredible. And then of course we see the ram right here. Here is the crucifixion of Peter. Once again, check that light out. They say there was art before him and there was art after him, and it was not the same. So we're going to see from now on a lot of that light coming in like that. So that spotlight thing is something Caravaggio invented, and all the artists afterwards are going to be influenced by it. We call it Caravaggio-esque. Here's the doubting Thomas, so the doubting of St. Thomas. He's sticking his finger in that wound right there. Okay, all right. All right, quickly we're going to move to our next artist. This is Rembrandt. You've heard of Rembrandt.
Mm-hmm.
He was up in the north, so he was in Amsterdam. He really, really, really sort of like Albrecht Dürer. He liked his own face apparently, but he wasn't as handsome as Albrecht Dürer. But he painted lots and lots and lots of self-portraits. So that's a self-portrait. Here is another self-portrait with his girlfriend, and that's his girlfriend too, Saskia. Notice he has a lot of dark, very dark stuff here. I believe that's her again. She was one of his favorite subjects. Then we have the anatomy lesson. Here we see those pilgrim types right here. Once again, see some light coming in? Caravaggio influenced that. The most famous probably of his paintings would be the Night Watch. You've probably seen this. These Dutch guys with their Dutch clothes. We have light coming in. I will tell you that the way he painted, for some reason, the dark colors got darker over the years. Okay, so they've taken them and kind of cleaned them up a little bit, and it's much brighter now that they've cleaned them up. Oh, you've seen this one. We talked about this when we talked about what was going on with Belshazzar and the handwriting on the wall. Remember, that was him. And this is cool because this was the one America had. This was, I can't remember the name of it, this ship right here that was anyway, it was stolen out of the museum, and it's never been recovered, so we don't know where it is. Yeah, somebody's got it in their private collection somewhere. They stole it. Oh, this is Prodigal Son. I have this hanging in my house. That's all Rembrandt. But I'm going to show you here. This is going to be a video we're going to watch of his self-portraits, and we're going to see how he looked all of his life. Okay, so it's kind of creepy, but cool at the same time. Portraits. Easy subject to study. He's always there, right? He always shows up. He's still when he wants to be still. All right, you get the idea. Yeah. So like Albrecht Dürer. Now, also we have a guy named Jan Vermeer. Now this we think might be a self-portrait, and we're not sure because he was very, very private. I love Vermeer. He lived in Holland. Here is his studio. He painted this, his studio right here. This is one of his famous paintings. I have this in my house. This is the Milkmaid. Okay, we got light coming from a window, Caravaggio-esque, okay, coming from a source. And it's on her, she's pouring milk into here. Notice she's not doing anything important. Also Caravaggio, right? This is what we call a genre painting, just a regular old chore. The milkmaid's pouring milk into a bowl right there. We're going to see this window and this room in most of his paintings. Notice also the broad brush strokes here. They're broad. You can tell they're brush strokes, right? That's on purpose. It's to bring in that light, to bring in that reflection, actually reflection happening there. The artist studio, we think that's him, the back of him right there. And notice we have that same window right here. We have, this is called the allegory art of painting or allegory of painting. And so that's supposed to be important right there, that showing how important painting is. There he is. He's using something called a maul stick. A maul stick is still used today. They rest it on the canvas, and you can put your hand on it, and you won't get as tired. Okay, one of his most famous paintings, the girl in the pearl earring. There was a movie made about him. I don't know how accurate that was. It's probably not accurate because we don't know much about the guy's life. And this one, we have our religious paintings too. Remember, of the northern type, northern Renaissance type. Here's our window once again. Not doing much. She's reading something. Both of these ladies are reading something. And she's measuring something. She's got a little weight, like a little scale right there she's measuring. And this lady is, I can't tell what she's doing. Pouring a bottle or something? Okay, so this is the idea of the camera obscura. People definitely think that Vermeer was doing this. Okay? In fact, there's this really, really great, what's it called? Documentary about, it's called Mike's Vermeer or something like that. Mike, this guy named Mike, who tries to reproduce a Vermeer painting by doing this, and he does. It's really very good. So you've got this room in here. They got a lot of light coming in here, so that's why Caravaggio had to have so much light so he could get this to work. Where he got the light, I don't know, because they don't have spotlights or anything. But Vermeer apparently was supposedly doing it as well, ending up with this thing upside down here. But like I said, he still had to paint it. Just because I could maybe trace it, this kind of thing. But so if it happened, I don't know. Then we have Peter Paul Rubens. He's in Flanders. He became very, very wealthy, sort of like how Dürer, remember Dürer became wealthy off of his art. This guy did it as well. He had a big studio that he set up. You can go to his studio today. It's still there. And he had lots of people working for him. He only painted the important parts of the portraits. We saw this, that's Henry IV looking at the portrait of Marie de Medici. She commissioned this painting after her husband was dead. And he's like, oh, she's wonderful. I want to marry her. Yeah, blah. Probably not true. But it is Rubens who painted it. This is the hall in the Louvre in Paris where you can see the whole series of Marie Medici coming to France to marry the king. So she's really celebrating that. And then we have, so is this Peter Paul Rubens? I thought this was, I guess that's Peter Paul Rubens. There's a detail of the hand right there. That is Samson and Delilah right there. Is that Rubens? I'm afraid that's somebody else. Okay. Descent from the car. Oh, this is definitely Rubens right here. This is quintessential Baroque painting. You see this big swoosh of an S shape from the arm swooshing down like this. That's quintessential Baroque. You have a big flourish kind of in the middle, but using light, and then we have dark around it on the other sides right here. It's the middle part of a triptych or something you would have in on an altarpiece, like they did up in the north. Okay, really quick over in Spain. There's Henry IV and Marie Medici. It's so important what their kids ended up doing. Their daughter so here's their son, Louis XIII. Their daughter, Henrietta Maria, married Charles I of England, who we met last week. Their other daughter, Elizabeth, married this guy. His name is Philip IV of Spain. And during their court, they had this, it's the waning of the Golden Age in Spain. So this is well after the Spanish Armada and that kind of stuff, which was the beginning of it. And our artist there is this guy called Diego Velázquez, the court painter of Philip IV, the end of the Spanish Golden Age. Here we're going to see lots of Caravaggio coming in, lots of light coming in. Genre paintings right here, some tour de force type stuff, pouring the wine into the glass. Here's they're cooking some stuff on a little stove right here. Once again, he paints glass really beautifully. That's very hard to do, to paint glass, because you can see through it. Here's the water cellar of Seville. He's got this water jug right here. He's holding the glass. If you can see it a little better, you can see a water droplet on the side of the glass right there. Here, this guy back here is drinking a glass of water. All right, there's the cup. I brought it in close. See the drops of water in there? That's a tour de force right there. All right, this is there was a contest, not a contest, a poll amongst artists of the world in the later part of the 20th century, so very recently, saying, what do you think is the most famous painting ever painted? And Diego Velázquez is going to win. And I don't know if you'll ever even recognize this painting. Because wouldn't you say something like Mona Lisa or something we all would recognize right here? This is called Las Meninas. Let's see, there it is. Do you recognize it?
I don't recognize this version, but I recognize who was the guy who repainted it. one who's paying?
I don't know, but this is very an interesting take on what's going on here. First of all, what's happening in this painting? Do you see this giant canvas? We're looking at the back of it. Okay, there's the painter. Who's he looking at? He's looking at us. Remember Raphael back in the day, the painter looking at us? He's looking at us. Okay. What would you think this painting's about? The name Las Meninas says is called Ladies in Waiting. This is the Infanta Margarita is her name. She is the crown princess of Spain. This, by the way, is not the daughter from the French princess. She had died already, and this is a new queen that he has. So this is pretty interesting. These girls are trying to keep her occupied. These are her ladies in waiting. We have a priest back here, a nun and a priest. We have the painter here. We have the guy holding the door back here. But right here, do you see that? That's a mirror. Do you see two people in the mirror? That's the king and the queen. Where are they? They're where you are. Okay? So he's looking out at the king and the queen and painting them on this canvas, and we can see their reflection in that mirror right there. It's very interesting. So what's he doing? He's painting a portrait of the king and queen, but we're not looking at a portrait of the king and queen. We're looking at a portrait of him. And little Margarita right there. I will tell you, this is interesting. There are two dwarves here. Dwarves were pets. I hate to say it that way, but they did. The Queen of England also had a pet dwarf, a guy. You know, they thought little tiny people were very fascinating. You know, so they include them in a lot of paintings right there. Oh, I forgot to put that one up where it showed the geometry. Okay, so you can see a little closer in now here. So there's that paint. There's the mirror. There's Philip back here with his new wife. There's Velasquez. There's the mirror. There's what we would think would be the main person in the portrait. And that's the prime minister, if you will, back there. And then there is Diego Velasquez. All right? And now I'm done. Next week we'll get into the actual what do you call it? Enlightenment. The Enlightenment. Some more philosophy, but not as bad as this. So if we got through this philosophy, that's pretty good. All right, y'all. See you next week.